Before understanding at input, at output, decorators and Angular lifecycle hook, we must know what are parent-child components. Suppose we have a parent component in our single page application with a input and a button field like this. Most of the time your app component or root component is only the parent component. And if there are any other components inside this component, then they will be called child components. So here this is the child component. Now let me show you how to do this in code. Here we have the fresh Angular project with app component and we will consider this as a parent component. This is the HTML of this parent component. Blue color border with some margin and text as parent component. And here is the browser view of it. Now we need a child component inside this parent component, right? This is the objective. For that, inside the app folder, we will create a child component. For that, open terminal, press Ctrl C to stop the application, write ng, G for generate, C for component and then component name which is child here and press enter. Here is our child component created and let me just put some HTML, CSS here for green border, margin and text child component. Do not much bother about this HTML here. This is just for designing. This has nothing to relate with the parent component. Just for the borders I have created it. Now the point is how to make this component as the child component of the parent component so that this child component will be visible here inside the parent component in browser. So that is very simple. Go inside the child component TypeScript file, copy the selector and then go to the parent component HTML file and paste the selector inside the parent component. So here we have the selector inside the HTML file of the parent component. We can put many child components like this inside the parent component, inside this parent component. If you remember, it is same as we put the app component selector inside the index.html file, right? App root selector. Now to see the changes, the parent inside the child inside the parent, open the terminal, run the application by typing ng serve and press enter. See, in the browser, the child component is present inside the parent component now. So we have established the relationship of the parent-child component. So this is the answer of this question. If you have any queries, please ask me in the comment section. Here is the question. What is add input decorator? How to transfer data from parent component to child component? The answer is very simple. At input decorator is used to pass data from parent component to child component. Now let me show you a real-time practical example of its use. Here you can see how the data is entering into the input field of the parent component and the same data will be parallelly updated in the child component. You can remember something after watching this and that is two-way data binding. If you know two-way data binding, that is great. If you don't worry. Just see my previous videos and you will get a understanding what is two-way data binding. Now here is the final flow. Here we have our app component as parent component and then we have the child component. Here we will enter the data inside the input of the app.component.html file which will be then passed and written back from the app.component.ts file, and that will happen with the help of this two-way data binding. Then this data will send from the parent component to the child component and child component will receive it with the help of this input decorator. And finally, child component will send the property data to child component HTML view with the help of string interpolation. because string interpolation can send data from the component to the view. So this is the whole idea. Now let's do the same thing in the code. We know that if we put selector of this child component here inside the app component, then this will set a parent-child relationship between these two components, right? Now first we have to input the data in the parent component HTML file. For that we will use the two-way data binding like this. This will send the data to the parent component TypeScript file, and then at same time it will return immediately the same data in this text input property only. Now we have some errors here. First is ng model is not defined. For that we have to go to app module and then include forms module inside the imports, because ng model directive is a part of forms module only. So that is the required thing. Then to resolve the second error, which is txt input does not exist, we have to create this property txt input inside the parent component text TypeScript file like this. So all two-way binding is set. Now we have to send data txt input from the app component.html file to the child component TypeScript file, and we will use property binding for this. See, this app child is the selector of the child component, right? And through it only will send the data like this. This message from parent property should be a property in the child component. That's why it is showing the error here. Now let's create this property in the child component. But this property right now is not capable of receiving any data from any other component, right? So to make it capable of receiving the data from other components, we will use this input decorator like this. So this is the thing, this is the job of the input decorator, to make a normal property and convert it into a property which can receive the data from outside components. That is the job of input decorator. In that way, Angular framework will know that this property can receive data from the parent components. Also, we have to import the input also like this for this input decorator, otherwise this will show the error. Now as the last step, we have to pass this received property value to the browser or to the HTML view, right? For that we will go to the HTML view, and here we will use string interpolation like this, which will transfer data from the child component to the child view. That's it. All the things are now in sync. Now let me show you the output in the browser. See, whatever I am typing in the parent component is reflecting in the child component. So this is the whole story, and this is the role of that input decorator also, and the answer of this question. If you have any queries, ask me in the comment section and I will be very happy to answer it. Here is the question. What is at output decorator and event emitter? The answer is simple. At output decorator and event emitter together are used to pass data from child component to parent component. Let me show you a practical and real-time use of it. Here is our parent component, and inside that there is a child component. Now whatever I am typing inside the input of child component, that is reflecting here in the parent component. This is possible with the help of output decorator and event emitter only. Before diving in the code, let me show you the flow. Here we have two components, parent and child. Now first user will enter some text inside the child component HTML file, right? That text will be transferred to child component TypeScript file via event binding. If you don't know event binding, don't worry, you can watch my previous videos, or you can just think that event binding is used to transfer data from component HTML file to component TypeScript file. That's it. Then the next step is this child component TypeScript file will emit the event, or you can say inform the parent component that here I am sending something with the help of @output decorator and event emitter. So this is the second step. And then this app component HTML will again send the data via event binding to TypeScript file, and then finally display the data in the parent app component HTML file via interpolation. So here finally this is a 3-step process: 1, 2 and 3. Now let's see how to code this. First step is to configure the HTML file to send the event binding code like this. Here input is an event, as whatever text we will enter in input text should immediately go to the parent component, right? Now on this event we will call this function of child TypeScript file send message to parent. Here $event is the event itself, meaning in TypeScript file via this $event you can extract whatever you have entered in the input text here. So this is the purpose of $event, to pass the data to the TypeScript file. Now this is showing error because this method is yet not created in the TypeScript file, right? So let's go to the TypeScript file and create it. Here in this method with the here in the method we have received the event like this. This is the first step. Now the second step is to send this data from the child component to parent component file. For that we will use the instance of event emitter and will import the event emitter at top like this. Now the question is, what is event emitter? It is basically to use emit events only. Yeah, I know it's a silly answer, but this is the answer only. So emit events means discharge the events to other components, and that is the purpose of event emitter, to discharge the event to other components again. So this is used with @output decorator to send the event to the parent component. So okay, event emitter will discharge the component to the other components, and @output decorator will discharge it to specifically to the parent component. So that is, and to make it work, let's import output also. Now this is all configuration is done. Now how the event will be sent? So when this send message to parent is called from the child HTML view, then this send a message emitter will emit the event like this. Here we will extract the text from the $event, as I said earlier, and send as parameter like this. So the second step is done. Now we have emitted the event. Now as the final step we have to receive the event message in the parent component. So we will go to the parent component and we will take the help of event binding here like this. Then send this received event to the TypeScript file with the help of this function receive message. So we have received something here from the child component and we are sending it to the TypeScript file now with the help of event binding. So go to TypeScript file, create this function, create a property also message from child, and then set the property to the message received from the child HTML view. Okay, like this. And final, after setting, go to the child HTML view and just use interpolation to display the value of the message. So this is the property we just created, message from child, and in order to transfer this from the component to the HTML, we have used this interpolation. That's it. All the 3 steps are done and the application is already in running mode. So let's go to the browser and test the changes. See, inputting here in the child component and it is going to parent component as expected. So this is the answer of this question. Now you know how to transfer data from child component to parent component. And if you have any queries, then ask me in the comment section and I will be very happy to answer them. Here is the question, what are lifecycle hooks in Angular? This question is very important and it is asked in many interviews. So what is lifecycle hooks basically? In simple English, a component from creation to destruction goes through several stages, and these stages are the lifecycle hooks. These stages will cover activities like component instantiating, rendering the component HTML view, creating the child components if required, and finally destroying the components. Now, why as a developer we need lifecycle hooks? Because might be we want to add some behavior in the component when it is instantiating. For that purpose, we need particular a component hook inside which we will code for this particular thing. So that is why a developer need component hooks. And here is the list of component hooks provided by Angular. You can code inside them to change the component behavior at any point of time. Here note that the first one, this constructor is not the part of the lifecycle hook. But it's a very important thing to know. That's why I have included it. We cannot ignore this. This is a very important part of a TypeScript class. Now let me give you some theoretical overview about some important hooks, which you can tell in the interview. After that, we will pick those hooks and will understand them in detail in separate questions. So quickly, start with the first thing as that is constructor. This is the default method of the TypeScript class that is executed when the class is instantiated. It always runs before any Angular hook and it is not a part of lifecycle hook. Second is ng-on-changes. It is called when the input property of the component changes. You remember input decorator? Yes, this is related to that. We will discuss this in upcoming question. Third is ng-on-init. This is the most important hook and it is called when the component is finally created. After this, we have this ng-do-check. This is not so important, but the purpose is when component is finally created via this ng-on-init. And if Angular is not able to detect some changes in the component until then that thing can be handled in this ng-do-check hook. So that is its purpose. After this, we have these four hooks which run only for child components, and if a component do not have any child components, then none of them is required. And finally, the last one is ng-on-destroy. This is called when the component is destroyed. So that is the whole quick overview of the hooks. Now in upcoming question, we will focus on the most important ones. If you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section. Here is the question. What is a constructor in Angular? So here inside the component class, we will have the constructor like this. Now here are some important points about constructor. The constructor is a method in a TypeScript class that automatically gets called when the class is being instantiated. So this is one point. Another important point is constructor always run before any Angular hook and it is not a part of lifecycle hooks. This is another very important point. So the thing is now why we need constructor. What is the use of these constructors? So the first and the most widely used is constructor is widely used to inject dependencies or services into the component class. There are other uses, but this is the most important one. In every good Angular project, you will find services, and how we use services, we use it by injecting them inside the components via this constructor only. I have covered services and dependency injection in detail in other questions. Now let me show you quickly how the constructor is the first thing which execute in the component class. Here in the code, we will put some log messages inside constructor and some messages inside ng-on-init lifecycle hook. Now let me run the application. Open terminal, type ng serve and press enter. In the browser, inspect the document, then go to console and see the message printed. First message inside constructor will be executed. And the first message here is from the constructor only, and then the message inside from the ng on init will be printed. So this shows that the constructor is the first thing which will be executed inside the component. This is the answer of this question, and if you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section. Here is the question. What is ng on changes lifecycle hook in Angular? The ng on changes is the first lifecycle hook which Angular fires when it detects any changes to the input property. So whenever any change will happen to the input property, that change will be detected by the ng on changes lifecycle hook. Now I will show you a practical use of it. See here, we use input decorator property to transfer data from parent component to child component. I explained this in my previous questions. So whatever user is entering in the parent component input here is reflecting in the child component, because the data is transferred from parent to child via using this input decorator. Now whatever change is happening in this text, or we can say this input property, that we can record with the help of ng on changes hook. Now let's try to understand how we will use this ng on changes in the code. Here is the code where parent component will send some data and this child component will receive that data with the help of this input decorator property. Now our requirement is to log the changes happening in this input property. For that, in the TypeScript file of this child component, first we will create the ng on changes method like this. Then we will implement it also because that is necessary. Now after that we will just log the message from parent like this. Now if we will go to the browser and if we entering something here, see the log is printing here in the console, because ng on changes method is tracking the changes in the input property. So this is happening with the help of only ng on changes method. Now the point is how to track what was the value before and what was the value after the change. For that we will go back to the code. Here we will just take the help of this simple changes object. We will pass this as the parameter in the ng on changes method. This object will track the changes in this particular input property. Now let me just print the change object now, and that now I will show you in the browser how it will print the change. In the browser, if I enter now 2 times d, here you can see we are getting the object, and if I will expand this, then we are getting 3 things here: current value, first change and previous value. Current value means the current value which is 2 times d, right, which is right now in the input field. First change is false because when we press d the first time, that was the first change. See above, this is the first change, and here it is true because at this point of time it is the first change, but now it is not the first change, that's why it is false. And then the last is previous value, so which is d here, and in the above case it is blank because initially there was nothing inside this input text field. So this is the whole story about ng on changes, which detects any changes in the input property. Remember, only input property. If you will create any kind of other property, then ng on changes will not detect the changes inside that property. This is for only input property. This is the answer of this question, and if you have any queries, please ask me in the comment section. Here is the question. What is ng on init lifecycle hook in Angular? This is the most important hook of the component lifecycle. The definition is ng on init signals the activation of the created component. That means Angular framework has created the component and now developer can write some code inside this hook for component operations. Component operations like loading some content to the component, setting subscriptions, etc. etc. So this is the primary thing and primary role of ng on init. You can tell few more things about this hook to the interviewer. For example, this is the second hook and called after ng on changes. ng on init called only once during the component lifecycle. Unlike ng on changes which may be called many times, if input property is not there, then ng on changes will not be even called at all. But ng on init will be called only once. And then Angular knows this is a very important component to code, so when you generate a new component, then this ng on init code will be present by default inside the component. So this is all about the ng on init lifecycle hook, and if you have any queries or feedback, then please write in the comment section. Here is a differences question, and differences questions are the favorites of interviewers, because with this they can check two concepts with a single question. Now the question is, what is the difference between constructor and ng on init? Let's start with the definition of ng on init. ng on init is an Angular lifecycle hook, which signals the activation of the created component. Remember, it's an Angular lifecycle hook, and when this is called, when the component is already created. On the other hand, the constructor is a method in a TypeScript class that automatically gets called when the class is being instantiated. Meaning, constructor is not a part of the Angular lifecycle hook. It's a part of the TypeScript class. And Angular framework and TypeScript class are two different things. TypeScript can be used in other frameworks also, apart from Angular framework. Right now, Angular framework is using TypeScript class, but although they are two different things. Second difference is ng on init is called after ng on changes lifecycle hook, whereas constructor is called before any lifecycle hook. The first lifecycle hook is ng on changes, but the constructor will be called even before that. So when constructor will be called, the component is not yet created or not yet ready. Now the most important difference is when to use ng on init and when to use constructor. This can be a separate question, and it's a very important question. When to use what for coding? When ng on init will be called, everything about the component is already ready, or you can say it is already created. So developer use it to perform most of the business logic on component, and that code will be written inside this ng on init method. Lifecycle hook. Because if you will perform operation when things are not ready, for example, if you will perform business logic before the ng on init, then many a times application can break because the component is still not ready. Let me give you a comparison here. Suppose in real, the humans, if you put education or job stress in a newborn baby, then what will happen? Then things will not go as per the expectation, because many things like the brain, the body, the physical, that are not ready, still not ready in the human babies or the human child. So there is a time. Similarly, in component lifecycle also, the ng on init hook meaning is the component is mature now and we can do operation here. Before that, it can be too risky. Similarly, when constructor called, when we will call the constructor or the application started, then constructor is called, everything in component is not ready. Only some things like component is still in the development phase. It is still not created or not developed. So at that point, mostly we used for just injecting the dependencies only. So this is one very important thing which we do inside the constructor, and that is injecting dependencies. Apart from this, we can declare variables, instantiate some classes, but not more than that. Very limited code should be placed inside the constructor. Because why we inject dependencies in constructor? Because dependencies do not have to do anything with the component maturity. It is not related whether your component is created or not created. That's why inject dependencies in the constructor. I hope now the differences are pretty clear to you, and you can explain these same differences in the front of the interviewer easily. If you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section.